Ever notice how some people seem to run on a completely different setting than everyone else? Quieter, weirder, somehow both slower and faster at the same time? That's not personality quirks scattered at random. Think of intelligence less like a single trait and more like a set of default settings running quietly in the background of someone's mind, shaping habits most people never think twice about. Here are 10 of those settings, and what they're actually telling you about the mind running them. Reading facial cues. You're in a conversation and you catch something. A flicker of hesitation before someone answers. A smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. Most people miss it completely. That's not you being paranoid or overly suspicious. Psychologists studying emotional intelligence have found that the ability to detect microexpressions, the fleeting, involuntary facial movements that last a fraction of a second, is strongly linked to higher social and cognitive processing ability. Your brain is essentially running a second analysis in parallel with the conversation itself, cross-referencing tone, timing, and expression all at once. It's a setting most people never even knew they had switched on. And once you notice it in yourself, you start noticing just how much everyone else is missing. Losing track of time. You sit down to read one article or fix one small thing on a project, and suddenly it's dark outside and you have no idea where the last 4 hours went. That's not poor time management. Researchers call this state of deep absorption flow, a term coined by psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and it tends to show up most reliably in people who are highly engaged with complex, skill-matched tasks. Your brain essentially deprioritizes time tracking because every available resource is being funneled into the problem in front of you. It's the same mental state athletes describe as being in the zone, except yours might be triggered by a spreadsheet instead of a stadium. Losing hours isn't a bug in your focus, it's proof the setting is working exactly as designed. Talking to yourself. Ever caught yourself muttering the steps of a task out loud, like you're narrating your own life to an audience of one? That's not a sign anything's wrong. It's a setting called externalized metacognition, and it's one of the most well-documented tools the brain uses to think more clearly. Putting thoughts into words forces your brain into a more organized, deliberate mode, which is part of why athletes talk themselves through pressure moments and why children do it instinctively while learning. Even Einstein was famously known for mumbling to himself while working through problems. So the next time you catch yourself negotiating out loud with your car keys, that's not a glitch. That's your default setting doing exactly its job. Preferring depth over breadth, you've got one topic you could talk about for hours, while most small talk leaves you fading out after 2 minutes. That's not social pickiness. Cognitive researchers describe this as a preference for depth-first processing, where the brain gets more reward from fully mapping one complex system than skimming across many shallow ones. It's the same wiring that produces specialists rather than generalists, the chess players, the historians of one obscure war, the person who can explain exactly how a car engine works but has no idea what's trending on social media. Isaac Newton reportedly spent years fixated on single problems while ignoring nearly everything else happening around him. Shallow small talk just isn't where this particular setting was built to run. Enjoying dark or complex humor. If a joke lands for you that makes everyone else in the room go quiet, that doesn't mean something is wrong with you. Understanding dark or layered humor requires the brain to process the literal meaning, recognize the taboo angle, and then flip it into something absurd, all in a split second. That's a genuinely demanding cognitive sequence. And studies have found that people who enjoy this style of humor tend to score higher on measures of both verbal and nonverbal intelligence, while also showing lower levels of aggression overall. It's not about being dark-hearted. It's about your setting being tuned to catch a joke most people's processing speed simply skips past, needing significant alone time. You like people. You just can't be around them for 6 hours straight without your brain quietly begging for a reset. That's not antisocial behavior, it's bandwidth management. Highly active minds tend to take in more signals, more patterns, more social data per interaction than average, which means solitude functions less like an escape and more like scheduled maintenance. Susan Cain's research on introversion popularized exactly this idea. Solitude isn't a withdrawal from thinking. It's often where the deepest thinking actually happens. So if you've ever ducked out of a party early to sit in silence and stare at a wall, your brain wasn't malfunctioning. It was defragging. Overthinking small decisions. You send a 2-line email, then spend the next 20 minutes wondering if the period at the end made you sound annoyed. That loop is exhausting, but it's also a byproduct of a setting working in overdrive. Your brain isn't just replaying what happened, it's running simulations of what could happen, testing angles most people never bother to check. That relentless what-if machinery is part of why highly intelligent people are often excellent at spotting risks and patterns others miss entirely. The downside is occasionally losing sleep over a comma. The upside is that the same setting responsible for your 1 a.m. spiral is the one that catches the mistake in the spreadsheet before it becomes a real problem. Being highly self-critical. You finish a project everyone else calls impressive, and your first instinct is to list everything wrong with it. That's not low self-esteem, it's a setting called high internal standards, and it shows up constantly in people who are deeply skilled at what they do. The same precision that lets you spot a flaw in your own work is the precision that made the work good in the first place. You simply can't turn the pattern recognition off just because it's pointed inward. Perfectionism researchers note this trait walks a fine line, useful in small doses, exhausting in large ones. But the underlying mechanism is the same sharp eye that catches everything else around you. Questioning default assumptions, you see a rule, a tradition, or just the way things are done. And instantly your brain asks why. Why does the meeting have to be an hour just because that's the default calendar setting? Why do we do it this way when nobody remembers the original reason? That itch to interrogate the obvious is what separates routine thinkers from people who actually move things forward. Historically, nearly every major leap in science, art, and technology traces back to someone refusing to accept the standard answer. The setting simply wouldn't let them leave an assumption untested. It's a small habit with an outsized track record. Staying up too late thinking finally, there's the night owl setting, wide awake at midnight while the rest of the house is asleep. Mind finally quiet enough to actually think. Multiple studies have linked later chronotypes to stronger performance on creative and abstract problem-solving tasks, likely because nighttime removes the constant low-level noise of a busy day. No meetings, no notifications, no interruptions competing for attention. Historical figures like Winston Churchill and Nikola Tesla were both known for working deep into the night, long after everyone else had powered down. Turns out, some settings simply run better once the rest of the world logs off. 10 different settings, one underlying pattern. None of these habits look impressive from the outside, and most of them get mistaken for flaws by people who've never had to live with them. But underneath the overthinking, the late nights, and the need for silence is a mind that's simply configured to notice more than most. So which of these 10 settings is already running quietly in your background? Let me know in the comments, and if you want more deep dives into how the mind actually works behind the scenes, stick around and subscribe.